I started my early working career back in the 70s in the fire equipment business. Worked around a lot of condos and so forth, and I observed that there was a need for fire alarm maintenance. So I would hire the electrician that was business next door. He was a master electrician, and just hire him to do it, and I would ask questions and observe very carefully. He was an old school electrician. He was the kind of guy that in order to test whether the circuit was hot or not, he would lick his fingers and touch it. Hot. I got pretty good at troubleshooting circuits by doing this, and I was able to go ahead and get an electrical license. And on the exam for that, I remember most of the questions being about electrical safety. This license, plus my experience with a particular alarm system, Faraday was the brand, caused me to be hired by a very large company who had just won a contract with Broward County Schools. And it was for maintenance and repair of those alarm systems. Every electrician that has any time on the job has a story or two about what happens when you fail to control an electrical circuit and a short circuit occurs. I'm one of those people. One day I was troubleshooting a circuit on one of the systems in school, and a box I wanted to check was about 12 feet off the ground. So I got an aluminum ladder and put it up. There was chicken wire up along the surface for some reason. So my aluminum ladder was also leaning against chicken wire. So when I opened the box and I grabbed the two wires to check the circuit, I had a grip on it about a ½ inch back of the exposed copper. Now, as I put the wire nut down and I went to grab my meter, all of a sudden I observed that my fingers were advancing towards the copper on their own, out of my control. And to the point when they actually locked on to the copper, by then my arm was totally numb. And it was painful. What would you do in this situation? Well, I jumped off the ladder because I still had use of my legs. I survived that, bruised ego and such. Now, that was my first lesson into what's called an electromagnetic field when it comes through a 220 volt circuit. This you see there's two waves, one the mechanical wave and electromechanical wave. On the one with two of them, it's showing both. And the conduit, the current, the green is the wire going through. So around that is a circuit, a wave that you cannot see, but it's there. And that's basically what got a hold of me in connecting my arm to ground. This field alone could generate enough current to damage the brain when your circuit is one electrode to the next. The most common analogy that we use to describe electricity is water pressure. The water pressure coming from the city faucet would be comparable to voltage. Water pressure is measured in PSI, pounds per square inch, voltage by volts. The water pressure in the hose can be constricted to increase its rate of flow, such as when you use a jet nozzle. This is comparable to current moving through a conductor or wire, or current moving through the constriction of brain chemistry from large loads to smaller circuits. By rate, it's meant a quantity, amount, or degree of something measured per unit of something else. The unit of measure for current are called amps, amperage. Amperage is the strength of electrical current when running through an electrical circuit. Voltage is one thing, but it's the amps can kill you or cause brain damage. The word microcosm expresses a metaphor or simile between a smaller system and a larger one. As you can see here, the size of the conductors vary. This is called wire gauge, and this size also determines the amount of current that can safely pass through it. Here in the macrocosm, it's easy to demonstrate what happens when you run too many amps through a conductor. One of the byproducts of running too much current through a conductor is the production of heat and the destruction of the conductor itself. Electricity plays a vital role in many legitimate medical procedures. For example, cardiac ablation for the treatment of AFib, atrial fibrillation. This is where an electrical conductor, known as a catheter, is inserted through a vein to a very precise location in the human heart. At that very location, a controlled current produces heat, which causes scar tissue to form. This scar tissue alters the rhythm of the heart. When it comes to the human brain, we are now talking about a microcosm of cellular activity. Electroshock causes an electric short circuit in the brain. This image is courtesy of the Allen Institute and gives us an in-depth, detailed view of the microcosm of a mouse's brain, which is not that different from the human brain. The image was created from a single piece of a mouse's brain about the size of a grain of salt, just to show the complexity of the circuitry inside the human skull. Whether we're in the microcosm or the macrocosm, the laws of physics still apply. According to Britannica, physics is the science that deals with the structure of matter and the interactions between the fundamental constituents of the observable universe. In its broadest sense, physics is concerned with all aspects of nature on both the macroscopic and submicroscopic levels. Bring this image back just to remind you of what happens with too much current going through too small of a conductor. Here's a drawing of a couple of neurons, brain cells. First, there we have the axon. An axon is a thin fiber that connects neurons, nerve cells, so that they can communicate. Neurons communicate via electrical impulses that trigger the release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. Axons also transmit electrical impulses from muscle and gland cells to the brain. Some of these neurotransmitters have names such as serotonin, dopamine, epinephrine. Epinephrine is more commonly known as adrenaline. There's the dendrites there. Dendrites are the structures of neurons, which conduct electrical impulses towards the cell body. Dendrites collect messages through other neurons or nerve cells in the human body. And finally, the synapse. A synapse is essentially a conduit, a place in the brain where the neurons connect and communicate. I'll make a comparison again of the parts of the brain cell. In the fuses in the macro universe, both brain cell and fuses don't repair themselves. The psychiatrist will say in promoting ECT, that's only a small amount of current passed through the brain. Does 460 volts of electricity or 0.9 amps sound like a small amount? And if you were one of these cells, would you consider that a small amount of electricity? Consistently, when asked how ECT works, the psychiatrist will sanctimoniously say, "We don't know how it works." In fact, Richard Abrams, who is a key member of the corporation Somatics Inc., which is the largest ECT manufacturer in the United States. This machine is one of their products. He testified in court that he doesn't know how it works. He and his partner wrote the textbook on ECT that appears to be scientific and authoritative while manufacturing ECT and selling them all over the world. This is the how-to book that thousands of psychiatrists count on to show them how and why it's done. Before public relation firms got involved with this industry, occasionally a psychiatrist would, when speaking to the public, say the quiet part out loud, that ECT causes brain damage, and that's how it worked, by causing brain damage. How are they defining works anyway? Behavior change. Patient has memory loss of the difficulties in life that brought him there. Tractability, doesn't complain as much. The purpose of using electricity is to cause a seizure. That is their stated mission. That's why you see them playing with the knobs in between treatments. If the voltage isn't high enough to cause the seizure, they adjust it so enough voltage is induced to cause a seizure. Over 100 years ago, a psychiatrist got the idea that seizures were somehow useful, and they're still trying to figure it out. Most medical professionals go to great lengths to avoid seizures. The more seizures a person has, the more potential there is for cognitive decline and different neurological dysfunctions, and potentially reduces the lifespan of that individual. Definition of seizure is: a seizure is a sudden, uncontrolled burst of electrical activity in the brain. It causes changes in behavior, movements, feelings, and levels of consciousness. Having 2 or more seizures at least 24 hours apart that don't have known cause considered to be epilepsy. Mayo Clinic has a blurb there, but at the bottom you see that people with seizures are more likely to have depression, anxiety, and other emotional issues. Dealing with the condition and the side effects of anti-seizure medications could also cause these issues. Basically, psychiatry causing the very thing they're trying to prevent, or they claim to be. Some quick facts now. The ECT death rate is 50 times higher than the US murder rate. Infant mortality rate was 7.5% following the administration of ECT to pregnant mothers. ECT sends up to 460 volts of electricity through the brain in order to induce a grand mal seizure. With an estimated 100,000 Americans given ECT a year for a total of about $260 worth of electricity, psychiatrists have created a $5.4 billion shock empire. The human brain operates on 0.2 volts, nearly 8 times less than the power of a watch battery at 1.5 volts, compared to up to 460 volts put through the brain in a single shock. 2,300 times the electricity that the brain uses to function. Side effects of ECT include amnesia, substantial and permanent memory loss, confusion, disorientation, apathy, disinterest, headaches, nausea, slowed reaction time, lowered intellectual function, and death. Children between the ages of 0 and 5 being shocked under the guise of treatment. ECT can cause 20 to 40 point drop in IQ. The FDA has never required clinical studies to prove electroshock is either safe or effective, despite being used for more than 80 years. From its beginning, psychiatry has believed that man is an animal. No spiritual aspect of mankind is considered. In the 1920s, psychiatrist Manfred Siegel claimed that he could successfully treat mentally ill patients by killing bad brain cells. In reality, he created brain-damaging seizures using insulin, which killed 5% of his patients. turned others into imbeciles. And here in the 30s, Hungarian neuropsychiatrist Ladislas Meduna believed he could drive out mental illness by inducing brain-damaging seizures with a powerful drug called metrazole. A psychiatrist could chemically shock 50 patients into a docile state in one morning, making the procedure extremely lucrative. The financial success sparked an even more profitable method of inducing brain-damaging convulsions, electroshock. In 1938, psychiatrist Hugo Cerletti, he's credited as being the inventor of ECT, wrote in his own documents that he was inspired to develop electroshock by the observation of pigs being led to slaughter. He saw that the effect of shock on these pigs was to make them more docile and controllable, and it made them not even fight for their own survival. For the next 2 years, Cerletti conducted experiments with electric shock on a variety of animals. He progressed to taking homeless people off the street and subjecting them to electric shock. According to Cerletti himself, his first human victim, a homeless man, begged him not to be shocked again. He said it would kill him. In the 1940s, the use of this brutal yet lucrative procedure to create convulsions became widespread and was exported throughout Europe and the United States. Throughout the 40s and into the 50s, governments began to take note and utilize this barbarity for political reasons, whether it be punishment or torture or even mind control experimentation, as in the CIA's MK-Ultra project. Psychiatry's image began to become associated with brutality that it is. In the 1960s, activists began to protest the brutal treatment of patients. Several court cases further defined the legal requirements for admission and retention into the hospital setting. Reforms such as deinstitutionalization were put into place. Deinstitutionalization was a federal mandate that releases patients back into the public, assuming that they would seek out community-based treatment at local facilities. Psychiatry began to work on its image problems. The final stage was to market ECT as new and improved. It was neither new nor improved. Even though they made the procedure look more acceptable, it was more dangerous than ever. The anesthesia and paralyzing drugs used actually raised the seizure threshold, requiring much more electricity to induce a convulsion. In the 1970s, public relation firms were hired to get the word out to improve the public image of psychiatry. Shock treatments became known as electroconvulsive therapy, ECT. Words like safe and effective were being repeated over and over and over again. Unfortunately, for this effort, the Academy Award-winning movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest hit the theaters. This was the film version of a book by Ken Kesey where he described his personal experience in a mental institution. The brutal scene of his being electroshocked without anesthesia was seared into the public's mind. Even today, people are surprised to learn the public's attention was now shifted to a new drug treatment modality, a new classification of drugs that focused on altering the brain's ability to transmit a particular neurotransmitter called serotonin. Was being touted as a new miracle cure for psychiatry. All the while, shock doctors kept on shocking. So, in the 90s, Empire Strikes Back. The American Psychiatric Association used its powerful lobby and the media enablers and vested politicians so that in 1996, the Mental Health Parity Act was signed into law. This federal law requires health insurers to cover mental health diagnosis the same as they cover other medical conditions, such as heart procedures or kidney stones. That meant the electroconvulsive therapy must be paid for by insurance carriers. In other words, the Mental Health Parity Act mandates that if your mental disease is listed in this book, this is the DSM-5 5TR. That is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual on Mental Disorders. It's in its 5th revised edition. This is not the scientific treatise you might think. It is merely the codification of observed behaviors deemed problematic, whose criteria are voted on. What is voted in is a system of classification of symptoms that is drastically different from and foreign to anything in medicine. None of the diagnoses are supported by objective evidence of physical disease, illness, or science. After all, the modus operandi of psychiatry is to first medicalize, then label, and cash in on normal problems of life. And I'll close with this. Ernest Hemingway committed suicide shortly after being subjected to a series of electric shocks. Before his death, he stated, "What's the sense in ruining my head and erasing my memory, which is my capital, and putting me out of business? It was a brilliant cure, doctor, but we lost the patient." Good point. All right. Lonnie, Alana White.
The Thymatron 4. Dun, dun, dun.
Now my assistant will apply the electrodes.
Doesn't matter what side. I'm not a real doctor.
But you play one on TV.
Can we vote who we want them to try on?
I'll be asking for a volunteer in just a moment.
No humans will be hurt in this demonstration. Over to you.
That'll be the disclaimer whether they get hurt or not. This I'm reading right now are ohms. That is the resistance basically from one electrode to the next. All the testing for this machine basically has a resistance set at 200 ohms. And the
measurement for resistance, right?
that's correct.
Okay.
So the higher the resistance, the more you've got this potential voltage here up to 400. So the more resistance there is, the more pressure to get the electricity from one electrode to the next. As I pointed out in the thing, resistance causes heat and destruction. She lost her.
I had one job.
Yeah.
Did it not stick?
It went to 700.
Oh,
and
you're
then it-
sweating, aren't you? So we got now.
I think I blew it off the charts.
I think you did.
It went to 700. And
It
then
did. I saw that to 700, but earlier when we tested her, it was 500 ohms of resistance, fluctuating between 500 and 600 ohms of resistance. The test that you use is 200 ohms of resistance, 10 watt. And when it says 10 watt, okay, that's good. Thank you for your assistance. So they're recommending for all testing and synchronizing the machine that you use a 200 ohm resistor, 10 watt. Watt, 10 watt basically means, as you see, it's kind of big. It's a gauge of wire, the watts. This resistor is able to handle higher amperages without blowing apart. Now I will demonstrate the machine. This Ectobrain 2 is basically what they use to simulate the conditions in order to test the machine. The machine normally in a live performance, this would be put here. This is an EEG. These are EEG cables. This machine is going to. It's looking for a base right now. The base measurement is going to be the EEG and the resistance of the brain. So instead of plugging this in and doing the electrodes like I was going to do, but it's a little more complicated, take an EEG reading, we use this simulator which does that. All right, so from no base, we're going to do the impedance test, which is, you see that? It was 200 ohms. Now it's looking for the baseline, which is going to be the EEG, the ohms, and the baseline of EEG is what starts. It's ready. So we're going to go ahead and fire it one time. But first, let's turn up the voltage. I referred to the knob playing. We see here we're at 5% amperage there. We're going to boost it up to, say, 85. And it's flashing what the voltage is at 40%, 45%, 227, 50, it's going the higher. And this also coordinates with age, too. So I guess the resistance increases as you get older. So 85, we're looking at 428 volts here. We're about to deliver. We're ready. Here we go. Little safety switch. We don't want accidental firing. Boom. Now it's printing out the EEG. And now this is the part where, I didn't want that. This is the part where this is monitoring and showing the convulsion. This is how they pay attention to this, because it's not a successful treatment unless we have a convulsion occurring. And that's how they know. All right, next test we'll do. We're still ready. We'll keep the monitor for the EEG hooked up. All right, I think this time I'm ready for a volunteer from the audience. Armand, of course it's you. This is a, just stand here, because what you're going to do is touch, after the electricity goes through, you're just going to touch it and feel it for heat. Remember, I said earlier that amperage through restrictions increases resistance, which a byproduct of that is heat. So we're going to see if he burns his finger. We're still at 85%. You can wait till the voltage stops. Don't. I'll say when it's okay. All right. Touch the resistor. Do you feel any heat?
Not yet.
No, you won't. All right. So that was because it's a 10 watt resistor and it handled it fine. Now I'm going to put on another 200 ohm resistor. Same resistance.
Yeah.
However, it's a quarter watt. Just like the electrodes going through the brain, from the brain to the axon, to the dendrite, to the synapse, we're constricting the flow of that electricity. And what does that produce?
Short circuit?
Heat and damage. All right. When I tell you to, put your finger on that resistor. It's all right. It's not my first time. All right. We don't have a base again, so it needs to. All right. This will also verify that it's 200 ohm resistor. Anyone see 200 there? Because I did. My finger was in the way, so it's ready. You ready? All right, we're still at 85%. Uh-oh. Well, no need to touch that. Go ahead, touch.
I smell it.
There's the answer.
Oh, I'm sorry. That didn't happen before. It was just hot. Did you get that smoke?
Yeah, I got it.
Oh. End of demonstration.